Would the House please come to order? The proceedings of the opening ceremony will begin shortly. Honorable Secretary General, esteemed Deputy Secretary Generals, student officers, distinguished delegates and guests, Herr Boyme, Ms. Hale, distinguished delegates, directors, and guests, on behalf of the BERMUN2 team, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 17th annual session of the BERMUN2 conference. My name is Noah Delfs, and I have the honor of serving as president of the General Assembly at this year's conference. Seated to my left is Nico Hammer, this year's Secretary General, and to my right are Carlotta Zenflim and Nicholas Heitbrink, who will be serving as this year's Deputy Secretary Generals. Before we get started with our conference, I yield the floor to Secretary General Nico to address the recent events in Ukraine.
I would like to read a statement by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres from yesterday evening, shortly before the illegal and violent Russian invasion of the Ukraine. President Putin, in the name of humanity, bring your troops back to Russia. In the name of humanity, do not allow to start in Europe what could be the worst war since the beginning of the century. Not only devastating for Ukraine, not only tragic for the Russian Federation. Stop your troops from an offensive to Ukraine and give peace a chance, because too many people have already died. Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights declares that education should be free and compulsory. Education is meant to promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. The present breach of international peace reflects the importance of tolerance and friendship, and we hope that in this conference, we will be able to achieve this aim which the founders of the UN envisioned. With this in mind, let us begin the BERMUN2 opening ceremony.
On behalf of all participants, we would like to thank the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for their continued support of our conference. The past year has unfortunately prevented this year's opening ceremony from being held at the CAS. We appreciate the efforts made to accommodate us and look forward to collaborating with them in the future. At this time, it is my honor to introduce Herr Boyme. Herr Boyme works as a consultant for the management of education forums in the Department of Political Education. He will speak on behalf of the CAS to welcome us to this year's conference. Herr Boyme, you now have the floor.
Participants, congratulations on taking part in the 2022 Berlin Model United Nations Conference. Unfortunately, we are not meeting in person right now here in the Academy of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, where your conference usually takes place. Hopefully, we will see us face to face again in the next year. As participants at the BERMUN conference, you will have the unique chance to experience the dynamics of multilateral negotiations firsthand. This is a one-in-a-lifetime experience that will not only give you the full grasp of complexity of international relations, but just as importantly, you will have the opportunity to meet and learn from so many peers who all share a passion for the pressing questions of our time. It is a privilege to address you as individuals, because your undertaking corresponds with the mission statement of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, shaping democracy together. We are committed to social cohesion in Germany, Europe, and throughout the world. Through our work, we strengthen democratic and constitutional forces and institutions in Germany, Europe, and globally. We promote the assumption of responsibility for oneself, for others, and for the community as a whole, shaping democracy together. This is not only our mission statement, it is your mission for the next 3 days. Democracy cannot function without active people embodying the spirit of democracy. So let me take a personal look back. Model United Nations. It reminds me of my participation as a student in a similar conference a few years ago, when I was a little bit younger. I had the chance to represent the country of Turkmenistan in the Economic and Social Council of the United States. But how does the United Nations and its council function? What do I and my peers have to do to come to a conclusion? A lot of things I didn't know, but was excited to find out. Far more important than what I did or what I didn't know is what I learned from my participation. Trying to reach consensus while representing countries so different in history, culture, and perspective, your difficult task is to weigh your own personal interests and values against those espousing contrary beliefs. You must work hard to reach democratic consensus without conceding your own values. Throughout your deliberations, you will discover that such agreement is only possible by identifying and acting upon a common understanding of human rights and political values. Remember that, especially in times when horrible actions are taking place in Eastern Europe at this moment. We live in difficult times. The COVID-19 pandemic has influenced all of our lives for almost 2 years now. The pandemic still prevents attendance at schools or university, still prevents young people from meeting friends, and still prevents young people like you from learning and preparing for their futures. Therefore, I want to congratulate the BERMUN organizers for choosing this year's theme, Effective Education for Equity and Excellence. Education is the key to equity and excellence, and it is also the key to sustainable social change and social mobility. It is a key for allowing children and teenagers to lead more prosperous lives than those of their parents. Furthermore, only excellent education can enable the global community to find solutions to the major challenges humanity faces, such as climate change. We must keep in mind that regardless of which global challenge we are addressing, it is impossible for one country to face it on its own. By joining the conference, you are preparing yourself for the role you will be assuming in the very near future. So I'm sure the next 3 days will have an impact on your view of the world and hopefully on the rest of your life. Thank you.
Thank you, Herr Boyme, for your kind welcome. And thank you for elucidating the importance of education in regards to social mobility and multilateral relations. We appreciate your comments and extend our thanks to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for their continuous support. We hope to be back at the CAS next year.
Thank you.
We are also thankful for the support of the John F. Kennedy School. We are also thankful for the support of the John F. Kennedy School and are pleased to have the acting American principal, Ms. Erin Hale, joining us. For the past year, Ms. Hale has once again proven to be a reliable and enthusiastic supporter of the program, ensuring that this conference would be possible despite all of the hardships we are facing. Ms. Hale, we are grateful that, despite your busy schedule and many obligations, you are able to speak to us today. You now have the floor.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the 17th Annual Spring Conference of the Berlin Model United Nations. My name is Erin Hale, and I am the acting American high school principal at the John F. Kennedy School. We had hoped to welcome you in person this year, but are nonetheless excited to see you again online. In the field of education, we know that we need to adapt to the rapidly changing world of technology. I'm not sure, though, that many of us could have envisioned what has taken shape in such a short period of time. Online platforms built from scratch, crash courses in broadband, screen sharing, and Zoom etiquette, and a how-to manual for hosting an international virtual event from your school auditorium. The work that students and teachers around the world have done to stay connected and engaged cannot be overstated, and I am proud to be a part of that work that is on display today. This year's conference will include over 200 participants from 30 schools and 9 countries, and is a celebration of continuity and community. We're excited to provide you with the opportunity to exchange diverse ideas, engage in honest and open discourse, and work together towards common goals. This conference is not possible without the help of many committed people and organizations. While we are not able to be there in person, we would like to extend our gratitude to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and Herr Andreas Kleine-Kronenberg for their long support of BERMUN. We also thank Herr Boyme for joining us today. I would like to thank and congratulate the students and staff of the Kennedy School for their efforts and hard work. The BERMUN teachers and advisors, Jason Lang, Bill Robertson, Yvonne Kupp, Johannes Luke, and Andrea Robertson. We appreciate your commitment to our students and to the vision and mission of MUN. To the student members of BERMUN, who have also donated countless hours to your preparation and planning this conference, thank you. Your passion and professionalism are unmatched, and we are proud to have you represent JFK. The secretariat of this year's conference, composed of JFK students Nico Hammer, Noah Delfs, Carlotta Sentflaven, and Nicholas Heidbrink, have chosen the theme of effective education for equity and excellence. In their letter to the Assembly, the Secretariat quotes Nelson Mandela, who said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." As an educator and lifelong learner, I cannot think of a more appropriate message for today. We see how misinformation, mistrust, and the misuse of facts and data can negatively affect our communities, our countries, our health. Now, maybe more than ever, it is essential that we understand the role education plays in maintaining a stable, highly functioning, and healthy democracy. Over the next 3 days, you'll have the opportunity to debate the importance of equity in education and work together to shape the conversation. I'm excited to hear where your discussions and combined efforts will lead. I encourage you, regardless of your experience, mother tongue language, or age, to actively engage in the sessions. You bring unique perspective, and your voice is important. Once again, welcome to the John F. Kennedy School and this year's conference. We hope that you have fun and enjoy the next 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale, for your remarks on the new challenges and benefits in education and the John F. Kennedy School's continuous support for BERMUN.
For the next 2 days, you'll be debating a number of topics related to our conference theme, Effective Education for Equity and Excellence. Therefore, we would like to invite Carlotta Sentflaven, one of this year's Deputy Secretary Generals, to take the floor to elaborate on the committee topics and their link to our theme. Carlotta has been a dedicated member of the BERMUN team for years and has always been very helpful keeping us on task with her lists during our late night meetings. Madam Deputy Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Knowledge is power. Thus, as Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Moreover, it is a privilege which most of us take for granted. Malala Yousafzai inspired headlines around the world with her childhood activism against the Taliban's restrictions on education for girls. As a result of her protest, she was shot by the Taliban in 2012. Malala survived, but she was ready to sacrifice her life in the pursuit of an education. Meanwhile, in our Western society, we wallow in the comfort of a stable and easily accessible educational system. I think all of us can relate to hearing or offering complaints concerning excessive homework, stressful exams, and redundant, outdated classes. Therefore, discourse surrounding this topic often centers around discussions of improvement and reform. Recognizing education for the privilege it is does not mean that reform is not necessary, but rather prompts the realization that despite its issues, it is something we need to fight for. Our conference theme this year is devoted to establishing an effective education in the pursuit of equity and excellence. We need to ask ourselves what truly makes an education effective at creating a stable future for individuals as both citizens and workers. During the following days, committees will grapple with different facets of this theme. Our Security Council will look at the establishment of effective education in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Issues regarding the integration of migrants in the education system will be of topic in the Junior MUN, and the UNESCO will take a closer look at the demands of curriculum and instruction for the 21st century. The requirements of education differ contextually. What should children learn in conflict-ridden and regionally divided zones like the DRC? What languages do you teach when the government recognizes 3 official ones? How do you teach migrants to be citizens of a country in which they are strangers? To ensure that these children can obtain a stable economic future, they require different knowledge than Western children do. We need to recognize that the means of reaching the aims of education are not globally identical. Simultaneously, we do not only seek to implement an effective education for economic stability, but one which pursues equity and excellence. A popular criticism of modern education is the strenuous nature of most systems. Under the capitalist aim of constant economic growth and innovation, it is not surprising that in recent years, our school systems have evolved to keep up with this objective. Children start school earlier, graduate in less time with more courses, and are tested more frequently. It is no wonder that stress often accompanies the average student. Therefore, the issue of ever-growing anxiety and stress in the pursuit of academic excellence will become of topic in our special conference. Another criticism of education is the lack of equal opportunity that prevails in most systems. Skin color, sex, and class can all negatively impact overall achievement, access, or quality of education, and thereby only aid in propagating an unjust society. The ECOSOC will discuss the reduction of national achievement gaps. It is their primary objective to create an equitable education for all. Despite our criticisms regarding the current education systems around the world, we need to recognize that education is the greatest opportunity for humankind. To return to Malala, one child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world, and our world is in dire need of change.
Thank you, Carlotta, for highlighting the committee topic's connection to the overall theme and explaining the need to contextualize reform in education. At this time, we would also like to thank Felina Sardan, who has worked hard to encapsulate our conference theme in this year's artwork. Depicted in the art are 4 students in their respective learning environments, highlighting the different challenges students around the world face. Let us give Felina a round of applause for her creative work.
Next, it is my pleasure to introduce this year's Secretary General, Nico Hammer. Nico has been part of the program for many years and is one of our most dedicated members. He has worked restlessly in the past months to help bring this conference to life. Mr. Secretary General, you now have the floor.
Why do you go to school? Aside from the legal obligation, because I think all of us would agree that there's more. When asked the question, would you go to school if attendance was made non-compulsory? Meaning, it is your choice if you go to school or not. These were the results. 91.5% of you said yes, and around 8.5% of you said no. So the majority agrees. You would go to school if attendance was made non-compulsory. That means that you agree that education has benefits for the individual and or society as a whole. You believe that there are certain goals that education tries and to some extent does achieve. But what is your goal within education? Why do you go to school? I think there's a pretty obvious reason for many of us. We want to get a degree, a high school diploma, an abitur, an IB, and then we can go to a good college or a university. And then we work for another 30 to 40 years. In other words, we go to school so we can get a good job. In order to get that good job, we need to be evaluated by the system so it knows who we are and what we're capable of. Those with the best evaluation will get the best job. So we think the more we learn, the better our job will be. And that's true. Statistically, people who've graduated from higher learning institutions earn more than high school graduates, if that's what you understand to be a good job. That isn't the only reason we go to school, though. We don't only do it for the degree. Education is also a formative process. Besides evaluation, it develops us in 4 major ways: intellectually, vocationally, socially, and morally. Intellectually, we spend time acquiring knowledge and gaining an understanding of the subjects we're taught. This includes the actual content of our knowledge and our ability to think critically. Vocationally, we learn practical skills that can prepare us for our job, and socially, we build meaningful friendship with our peers. We get away from our home life, and education gives us access to a different environment. In some sense, education still functions as daycare, and I think parents notice that during online learning. It's important for us to have something to do. Morally too. What's right? What's wrong? What's my responsibility in society? Being in a learning environment with students and teachers gives us a sense of that. So, education is about evaluation and development. When you leave school, you leave with a degree. But what does your degree say about you? Or to start smaller, what do your grades say about you? A grade is an assessment of you. Your intelligence, your conscientiousness, and your conformity to social and academic expectations. In his book, The Case Against Education, libertarian economist Bryan Caplan argues that 80% of education is about revealing what kind of person you are, signaling who you are. Let me explain what signaling is. Imagine you wanted to raise the price of a diamond. Now, there are 2 ways to go about this. 1, you could cut it very beautifully so the diamond is actually better. Or you could 2, appraise the diamond. Don't actually make it better. That appraisal has to be viewed as credible, sure, but it doesn't have to actually reflect reality. What that means in education is that students show up to school with a certain intelligence, conscientiousness, and willingness to conform. And then school puts them through evaluation that reaffirms that. While education still develops us intellectually, vocationally, socially, and morally, for the most part, it's about evaluating who you are and signaling that through your degree. In an education system focused on evaluation, development isn't incentivized and is actually discouraged, both for struggling students and successful students. We are rewarded far more for being than becoming. It's not your improvement and development that's being measured. It's who you already are. Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. But what's being measured is who you are in relation to others. It's not about development. Being the best also implies that others are not the best, and hence your success is equivalent to others' failure. And when we improve but still end up not meeting expectations, we're discouraged, and development is discouraged. Bryan Caplan says, quote, "The educational process filters out the people who wouldn't have been very good workers. So people who are lower in intelligence, lower in work ethic, lower in conformity, those people tend to do not very well in school. They get bad grades, they drop out," end quote. To prioritize development, it needs to be incentivized. When degrees are measures of who you already are, that's not going to happen. So, I've talked about why we do want to go to school. We want to get a job. Let's talk about why we don't want to go to school. It seems that most of us do agree with the statement, I enjoy going to school, as you can see on this poll. But I think all of us will agree, school can be pretty boring and is next to restricting. I'm willing to admit that I've almost fallen asleep in history class, opening a history book, reading a few pages, and then quietly writing answers to the questions posed to me is not engaging. I've heard a number of classmates say that the German class is next to completely useless. More times than I can count. I'm being evaluated on my intelligence, my ability to understand what education tests me on, my conscientiousness, and my conformity to the expectations of my environment. What is being developed when we study for an exam only to forget everything we learned right afterwards? We don't get to choose our curriculum. Studies show that the lack of freedom in learning and often the prioritization of memory over understanding makes students consider school a negative experience. Adding on to that, constantly being tested and evaluated is stressful. The population is growing and we're competing against more and more people in the labor market. Anxiety and self-harm rates have steadily increased in past decades. So you may agree that education is necessary, and you may agree that people should go to school. But still, you might not be satisfied with how the education system functions. Evaluation is important. It's necessary that we get feedback from our teachers. It's important for society to function, that we assess who is capable of being a surgeon, for example. But it's in the interest of individual and societal prosperity that development takes precedence over evaluation. It is more important that we have the opportunity to grow as humans, that our already existing qualities are reaffirmed. Again, that is true for everyone, for those struggling in education right now, and for those who are succeeding. As Article 26 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, education should be used for the development of human personality. In light of our conference theme, effective education for equity and excellence, think about how we can structure education systems in the pursuit of human development. What does being excellent mean in an education system based on development rather than evaluation? Let us aim not to create excellent students, but excellent humans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for your insightful remarks on why we should prioritize development in education.
Next, I am pleased to introduce this year's keynote speaker, Mr. Jason Lang. He is a dedicated MUN director, helping us to plan this conference and giving us valuable insights into the theme of education from his perspective as a teacher who has experience from teaching in the United States of America, Brazil, and here in Germany. Mr. Lang, you now have the floor.
In their speeches and videos, the Secretariat has cited Nelson Mandela, including Ms. Hale did, who said that education is the most powerful weapon to change the world. Powerful weapons like education can be used for the good or bad. On one hand, the French writer Victor Hugo saw the power of education for a different purpose. He said, "He who opens a school closes a prison." Edward Everett, the American revolutionary, said that education is a better safeguard of liberty than a standing army. On the other hand, the Brazilian Marxist author Paulo Freire wrote a book about how education is a tool of elites to oppress the poor. The Japanese Yana Toboso also worried about education when she said the line between education and brainwashing is paper thin. Mark Twain said, "I never allow schooling to interfere with my learning." Perhaps you are critical like Mark Twain, as others are critical of formal education. To be clear, our conference theme, Effective Education for Equity and Excellence, is not just about general learning or informal education. It's about the compulsory right to education in primary, secondary, and tertiary schools. BERMUN2 is a conference that will aim to make formal education more effective in realizing equity and excellence. In that sense, it's about reform. When people ask me how I, as a professional educator, would reform education, I respond simply, you tell me your aims, what your goals are, and I'll write your policy. So with my time, I would like to share 3 things from my experience to think about when considering educational reform. Lesson number 1, be effective. Good intentions don't equal good policy in action. When I first started teaching in the early 2000s in the United States, there was a new educational policy called No Child Left Behind. The policy was written during Bill Clinton's administration, but was implemented by his Republican successor, George W. Bush. After many voiced concerns about the low performance of public school students, the 1983 U.S. Department of Education report, it was called A Nation at Risk, reported that 40% of 17-year-olds tested could not successfully, quote, draw inferences from written material. 20% couldn't write a persuasive essay, and only 33% could solve a mathematics problem requiring several steps. The U.S. Congress implemented the No Child Left Behind policy. Since there's no federal educational system, each state would determine its standards according to some federal mandates, and then measure learning and seek to tie school and teacher performance to teacher employment. For anyone concerned with the poor, marginalized, or underprivileged, the slogan, No Child Left Behind, embodied an important aspect of equity. Many well-meaning reformers wanted to ensure that children, especially those who were failing in lower socioeconomic areas, would achieve excellence. However, many critics said that standardization was the wrong solution to the glaring problem of inequity. Some looked at many immigrants and had English second language learners, such as what the junior MUN topic will be, and were worried about the standards and that many would not be able to meet them. They were against standards. In some ways, they were more for equity of outcomes than excellence. Other critics were worried that this kind of standardized measurement was not excellent. It was not deep learning. It was about memorizing answers to easy questions. Others worried that state standards often had penalties, and they would incentivize some schools to work harder, but it would also incentivize cheating on tests or people to lower the standards of excellence. All of those things happened. I, for example, prepared students for 2 very different state tests. One was a relatively rigorous Latin test that required a fair level of grammatical and translation mastery for early learners. The other was a comparatively simple U.S. history test that primarily required rote memorization of trivia, such as, quote, identify the 16th president of the United States. Although it is important that American students know who Abraham Lincoln was, I believe that many standards that were established were very low, which some English second language learners were unable to pass, but it did allow most children not to be left behind at a very basic level. Critics with my experience found the No Child Left Behind policy to be ineffective in achieving excellence. Early in my career, I therefore learned that well-intentioned people don't always make good policy. There are unintended consequences. When you write reform policy, make sure as you champion what is good, make sure your policy is effective, not merely well-intentioned. The second lesson I would like to share is priorities have trade-offs. According to the book, The Cult of Smart, in which Friedrich de Boer criticizes the culture where we idolize intelligence, he says, quote, the basic tension, the elementary conflict of the American educational system, and I think of most educational systems, is that we are simultaneously asking our schools to function as vehicles of equality and machines for sorting people into different ranks of merit. Our system, as you see on the screen, our system can promote equality or it can sort people into a hierarchy of ability. It can't do both. As long as our education system creates winners, it will also create losers. As a teacher, I want both equity and excellence. But I do believe Friedrich de Boer is right. Prioritizing one will have trade-offs for another. Our Burmese president of the General Assembly wanted our theme to say balancing between these two. The key is to have both. But can you achieve both equity and excellence? How much can you have of one if you prioritize the other? How much excellence can you have if your system is primarily about no child being left behind? As a younger teacher, I spent a lot of my time trying to leave no child behind. My heroes were the teachers of Hollywood films such as Lean on Me, who made a difference for underprivileged individual students and communities. I helped my Latin students during lunch and after school. I tutored students with auditory processing difficulties to pass my history exams. I was so proud of the students who worked so hard. One of those students with auditory processing things, I would talk to her and it would take, and then she would hear me. It took a long time, and she would pass. I once illegally left my class and drove to a student's house who didn't show up for the first period. When I showed up at my student's shabby front door, I pleaded with his mother to send him to school so he would not be sent to a juvenile detention for truancy. She repeated her claims that he was tired and sick and could not come to school. I never saw him again. As I drove back to school, I asked myself if I had prioritized correctly. Had I abandoned 20 students in the classroom to help just one? Priorities have trade-offs. Meanwhile, I was a soccer coach, or as we say in Germany, Fußball, and I coached a very talented soccer team. Several of my most talented players would earn full college scholarships. I chose my 18-player varsity team from a pool in our school of over 2,000 students. At the end of each summer, 60 to 70 students competed in a series of very intense training sessions. After each session, some students were left behind, literally. Some students were disappointed, some cried, but not all of them were equally as talented. To put it in the words of our conference theme, at my tryouts, excellence was prioritized over quality, perhaps equity. The excellent athletes made it to the soccer team. The rest didn't. I remember thinking, what if I could treat my classroom like a soccer field? What if I could teach students who were motivated and chose to play? What if I could remove, and this time the weaker, some disruptive students, so that I could focus on students who were both motivated and talented? But in soccer, the objective was relatively simple: win a state championship. In education, the goals are not so simple, as our Secretary General just noted. In education, one has to prioritize the group over the individual, or the individual over the group. With limited time and money, one has to prioritize certain subjects. In education, one has to prioritize sometimes excellence over equality. And with each prioritization, there are trade-offs. So as you write resolutions and make educational reforms at this conference, look very carefully for the trade-offs. The opportunity costs of each of the meaningful changes you propose are out there. Thirdly, the good news finally, I would like you to think about prioritizing wisely in two ways, personally and collectively. Let's think about what the group needs. As delegates of UN member states, what kind of future do you want for your citizens or for migrants who come to your country? I mentioned the Nation at Risk report that was written in 1983. It was written in the chill of the Cold War. Many of its authors were fearful that the United States would not be able to compete with the Soviet Union. If you're an authoritarian state today like China, is peace and stability more important than freedom? If you don't prioritize freedom, will your stability fracture? If you are a democratic state, what do you want? As Nico pointed out, our Secretary General, the UN founders wrote in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that prioritizing developing the human personality, including attitudes that promoted tolerance for peace, rings true today for what we've seen in the news. What do we prioritize for a group, for a country? And on a final note, I would like to think about prioritization for an individual. And this is where I step off my role as encouraging you and looking at you as delegates, but now as students. One accompanying slogan and mantra to the No Child Left Behind was that failure is not an option. I love that spirit. I love the slogan. I used to think that if failure, however, is not an option, what does success mean? What do we mean when we prioritize excellence? On one hand, some of you may care very little about getting the best grades. And some of you may also, at the same time, be not that concerned about development or excellence. Aristotle, like the UN, argued that the human life most worth living were those that pursued some kind of excellence. For those of you who may not care about excellence, why not? Are you afraid of failure? Isn't the challenge of self-improvement something important to the human personality? And again, you've just heard arguments that's something worth pursuing from your fellow peers here. But on the other hand, for many of you here, many of you prioritize excellence, especially with your grades. In South Korea, it's not uncommon for students to study 16 hours a day and attend expensive private tutoring until 10 p.m. at night. And if you look at the PISA exams, if you look at a chart, South Korea is not even at the top. Hong Kong, China, Singapore. When I came to JFKS, a former BERMUN director, Frau Huveman, noted that many of you were increasingly very concerned about your grades. In my career, I've had more and more students now taking not two advanced placement classes in the American program, but 5, 6 a year. And I've asked some of them why. Meanwhile, as a teacher, I've seen more and more lawsuits over grades. More students think they are excellent and are less comfortable with just an average grade. Although by definition, average, we're all somewhere closer to the average than the excellent. So let me ask you directly, what do you prioritize? Why do you have to compete so hard, lose so much sleep? Why do you have to do this? Is this the fear of being left out? Is it the peer effect, where you're doing what everyone else around you is doing? Do you really need to do everything so perfectly? Do you need the distinction of being comparatively the best in your school? Is that high-profile university and job really more important than developing your personality? Why are you working so hard? I ask this because although you may not be able to change international politics, you can change your perspective. One of our former MUN students started studying law in Germany. After 1 year, she decided not to study law, and instead she got into the prestigious London School of Economics, the LSE, to study economics and politics. After 1 year, she eventually left the LSE to study medicine. We talked about this in reflection. She told me she was so concerned with grades, so concerned with school, that although it might, and I will quote her, said, it might sound cheesy, she stopped and asked herself why she was studying and determined that medicine was the best fit for her. I told her that this question was anything but cheesy. It is the question, if there is a question for an individual in education, why are you studying? As we think about educational reform in this conference, as you look for solutions to global problems, I ask that you remember 3 things. Be effective. Good intentions don't always equal good policy and action. Number 2, remember that priorities have trade-offs. And number 3, please prioritize wisely, both collectively as we look at the global community and our national communities and our local communities, but also for you individually as students. Thank you.
Mr. Lang, thank you for your thought-provoking comments on the meaning of effective education and what trade-offs we need to consider when prioritizing equity or excellence in the education system.
The video team has been preparing a short introductory video for the conference. Please direct your attention to the screen.
If there's any thought, better think of me for a little support. At a time of need, it'll be
This year's conference revolves around effective education for equity and excellence. 10% of the world's population has not received primary education, and in the modern world, education is becoming more and more of a necessity. Education should be a human right, and it's our job to guarantee it.
I present to you Noah Delfs, the President of the General Assembly.
This year at BERMUN2, we will be discussing the theme of effective education for equity and excellence. Although it is difficult due to extreme technological innovation, we must strive for equitable and effective education in the 21st century. As Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world. Since we have established that education aims to lay the foundation for our professional future, we must ask ourselves these questions. Should students memorize mathematical formulas and historical dates that are readily available on any digital device? Such questions allow us to examine the flaws of our education, which opens up new room for improvement. Although we would love to welcome you to the John F. Kennedy School here in Berlin, due to COVID regulations, we are unable to do so. Nevertheless, we will convene to discuss what we want for our future and how we can use education to shape it. Now, delegates, it's your time to speak up and fight for your future.
Education lays the foundation for a prosperous and sustainable future. That is why the United Nations has set the goal that by 2030, everyone should have access to equal and inclusive quality education. Dear delegates, we hope you enjoy this year's BERMUN2, and despite the circumstances, manage to lead debates and find solid resolutions. And with that, welcome.
Thank you to Oliver Wiesman and Amir Abushneg for motivating and inspiring us to collectively lead a discussion on the principles of effective education. Please join us in giving them a much-deserved round of applause.
For the past few months, it has been our pleasure to work with this year's team of student officers. We firmly believe that their contribution to each individual committee in terms of insight, character, and leadership will enrich all of our experiences at BERMUN2. We will now introduce the student officers of BERMUN2 2022 by their respective committees. In the Security Council, Solomon Iro, Theodor Hach, and Lena Kinder. In the Economic and Social Council, Ophelia Reuter, Lily Smith, and Samuel Beer. In the UNESCO, David Simonello, Philip Wagner, and Lucien Violant. In the Special Conference, Tadea Zering, Josie Riemer, and Yannick Gaul. In the Junior MUN, Maya Hauf, Iva Davidovich, and Philip Harashta. In the International Court of Justice, Taro Zhuang, Friedrich Martens, and Zeynep Spolka. There they are. We would also like to acknowledge the heads of the administrative staff, Marla Cook, Kate Beckley, and Stella Brass. And what you saw a few slides before this, we will also like to recognize our press editor-in-chief, Mia Robertson. These student officers have proven to be an enthusiastic and resourceful team. They have remained committed through the many unique challenges of this pandemic. Their hard work will make this year's conference an especially unforgettable event.
At this time, it is my distinct honor to declare the 17th Annual BERMUN2 Conference as officially open.
Distinguished delegates, some of you have the opportunity to address the forum and weigh in on the topics at hand. Although most ambassadors will be giving their speech in their first committee sessions, some ambassadors and delegates volunteered to address the conference theme now. This year we have prepared a video with 5 recorded speeches by 5 ambassadors, by one video with recorded speeches by 5 ambassadors. After these 5 speeches, we will be accepting rights to reply. A right to reply is a rhetorical question to one of the speeches, which will not be answered. We ask that you keep your right to reply clear and concise. If you wish to submit a right to reply, please access the BERMUN2 platform and send a message to the Secretariat Forum mailbox using the category forumwork/debate. Again, if you wish to give a right to reply, please access the BERMUN platform and send a message to the Secretariat Forum mailbox using the category forumwork/debate. After the speeches, selected rights to reply will be read out by the Secretariat. Again, we ask that you keep your rights to reply clear and concise. The opening speeches will come from the delegations of France, Germany, United Kingdom, Japan, and South Korea.
President, esteemed chairs, and fellow delegates. COVID-19 alone has wiped out 20 years of educational progress. We have already lost the connection to most children, especially in LADCs, due to action we had to take against the virus. In these rough times, it is ever more important that every child in the world has access to formal, mandatory education of high quality. We, the delegation of France, believe education is and will be a key sector to improve employability and security in all the countries in the world. In order to achieve this, we, the United Nations, must focus all our efforts on the democratization of higher education, research, innovation, and women and girls empowerment. Major steps have already been taken by the OEDC, such as the successful development and implementation of a new and effective strategy covering external action on education, vocational training, and integration of everybody into educational processes. In that regard, we encourage all nations to find further successful solutions to confront one of the greatest crises of our time. Thank you.
Most esteemed President, distinguished Chair, and fellow delegates, thank you for giving the German delegation the opportunity to recall a quote from Francis Bacon: "Knowledge itself is power." Since the beginning, mankind has developed its knowledge, and with it created science, politics, and has led whole countries. And every decision that we make today are based on the knowledge of the ones deciding. Consequently, in the German delegation's opinion, the people deciding should have experienced a magnificent education, for they will make the best decision for our world's future. In every country, in every city, and in every village, there are growing children who will have an impact on the world. And we, as the United Nations, are able to influence what kind of an impact they will have and how great this impact will be. As education determines the impact of the children of today on the society of tomorrow, every country should aim at giving them the best education possible. The German delegation is, however, aware that the educational structures a country can offer is determined by the economic success and financial status. In this sense, Germany would offer their support and see themselves as role models, and call for other countries to perceive themselves as role models as well, for others who are interested in an educated, democratic, and peaceful future.
Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates. Through education, we can become a country where everyone from every background gains the skills they need to get a good job and live a happy and fulfilled life. This was once said by our former Prime Minister, Theresa May. The United Kingdom believes that education should be at the forefront of any country's government, and that we also have a duty to help other countries build a sustainable and functioning education system. Our country's education system is known to be one of the best in the world, a claim that is backed by its usage in 160 countries across the world. However, even we still struggle with equity within our system. Equity means giving each student the resources needed to excel after leaving high school. Addressing the problem of lack of equity is not easy, and therefore we hope that together, as the UN, we can work towards a future where every student has a chance to make a difference in the world. Thank you.
Honorable President, esteemed chairs, fellow delegates, and dear guests. All over the world, every country is facing more and more severe problems. International disasters, such as climate change or the exploitation of impoverished countries, also become increasingly relevant. Alongside strong cooperation between us as UN member states, equitable and effective education more than anything else has the potential to provide us with a remedy to these multiple challenges. But how can we ensure a fair education for everyone? We believe that global compulsory education is the answer. It is true that there is a need for extremely advanced knowledge in some fields, but we cannot blindly leave the next generation to fail with the problems we are creating. This is why a progressive, equitable, and solution-oriented education for everyone is at the core of what we are aiming for in this conference. Thank you.
Education has been described as many things: a gift, a tool, a right, but above all, it's a path to the future. The benefits of education are many and great. That's why we place such great value on it in South Korea. Educated citizens are more politically engaged, commit fewer crimes, and live longer, to name just a few advantages. When we extend these benefits to more people, we all prosper. All our futures become brighter. And as South Korea has shown, we can all shape our futures if we have determination, if we are willing to make sacrifices, and if we invest where it matters. Change will only come with MEDCs and LEDCs working together to find solutions that improve lives. That is why we would like to ask all delegates to keep in mind that the raising of a placard in this conference can be the raising up of an entire community in one of our nations.
We will shortly be entertaining 3 rights to reply. Please submit them over the platform. The delegate of France in the SPC would like to ask the ambassador of Germany, how do you plan on implementing education systems modeled after your own example globally, especially in countries with entirely different cultures? The delegate of France in the SC would like to ask the ambassador of Japan, how will your country assure that not only discipline, but also fun and community play a big role in your proposed compulsory education, as the suicide rate in your country, especially under teenagers, is horribly high? The delegate of Russia in the ECOSOC would like to ask the ambassador of the UK, If improving equity in education is so important to the UK, why has the United Kingdom slashed their foreign aid budget and cut funding for state schools, which furthers the attainment gap between public and private sectors?
Before we adjourn and move to our first forum session, I have a few brief but very important announcements. If you are not participating and would like to keep updated with what is happening during the BERMUN conference, the BERMUN press team will report its work on the BERMUN website, bermun.de. If you are part of the conference, be sure to stay updated with reports about the entire conference by reading the press page. At this time, we would like to extend our sincerest gratitude to Alexander Ginter, who worked tirelessly on the platform throughout the last year. Alexander, your contributions are invaluable in making the transition to a digital conference not only possible, but exciting. Thank you again for your invaluable work. All delegates, once your committee session starts, you will hear opening speeches from the ambassadors and begin lobbying. Please be in your forum at 1:15, 17:15 Berlin time. All student officers, after the first committee session, please meet the secretariat in the student officer Zoom meeting.
All participants of BERMUN2, you will now join your first committee session on the BERMUN2 platform. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to seeing all of you soon.